Hey everybody, welcome to the Crossing King Garage. It finally got cool enough that I could come out here and I could record a very, very special countdown for me. As you can tell, we're out in the Crossing King Garage. It's not 185 degrees. It is nice today. So we're going to have a conversation, just a real brief conversation about my favorite band of all time. This is Crossing Kin, and I'm Randy. If you've been around for very long with Crossing Kin, you know very, very well that we love the band Chicago. Me especially. I got to see them. They were the very first concert back in the 80s when they ran Chicago 16, when they were on the Chicago 16 tour when I was in college. Fond, fond, fond memories. Seen them a lot since then. I will have to say, however, Chicago is beginning to get to the point of many bands from the 80s, 70s, and 80s, whereby their original band members are really too old to keep going. And while they retain their membership status or their financial ties to the band, there really not any of the original members left. So you have a group of incredible musicians who are carrying on that tradition, the name. And in the case of Chicago, you only have one band member, original band member, who is still continuing to tour. And of course, he's the trumpet player. Lee Loughnane is continuing. I want to say he's close to 80, and they're still doing over 200 dates a year. He has surrounded himself with the hand-picked replacements, so to speak, for all of the original members. Now, there's been a couple of three or four lead vocalists after Cetera, and Lamb has finally decided to not tour anymore. Pankow has not decided to tour anymore, so that leaves us with Lee Loughnane. Um, this is something that I think is kind of sad, but it's also very, very encouraging in the fact that the music in and of itself is so good that talented people want to keep the name and the traditions alive. If they put out new albums, I'm going to definitely buy them because it's that Chicago sound that you're listening for. That rock and roll band with horns, where they're only a handful, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Earth, Wind, and Fire, but in my opinion, the pinnacle is Chicago. Today, we're going to count down my personal, okay? You probably have your own favorites if you have listened to this band for very long of a period of time, and that's wonderful. I'd love to hear. Please leave comments with any of the ones that you think perhaps maybe I should have ranked. Now let's talk about their catalog for just a real quick second. They have many, many greatest hits collections now, but this is just going to take in consideration the studio albums. Live in Japan is not part of this countdown. Live at Carnegie Hall, Chicago 4, which is a 4 album set, not part of this countdown. This just counts the studio albums that the band Chicago have put out from Chicago Transit Authority all the way to, I think, now is the most recent release that they've had. Not too bad of a release, but you can begin to see that some of the songwriting isn't the same. The spark of the 70s and even some of the commercialism of the 80s that Chicago had has been lost to um, maybe just our time period as much as anything else. But as far as a band, they're still tight. They're still putting out those incredible, incredible horn licks, and they continue to be my favorite band of all time. Like I said, I saw them back in 82, 84, whenever Chicago 16 came out, and they were out of this world. They played for 3 hours that night, and they used The Beatles' Got to Get You Into My Life as one of their 4 encores. It was absolutely crazy at Barnhill Arena that evening on the campus of the University of Arkansas. And for our very first rock and roll concert, that was the way to begin. So let's go ahead and get started with the countdown. Today we're starting with number 10, and I'll try and keep the numbers as clear as possible because when you're talking about a Roman numeral ordered catalog, it can be a little bit convoluted as we're counting them down to number 1, but the record numbers are out there as well. So coming in at number 10, I have Chicago 11. Now, all of these records are going to have one or two of their own really cool singles, but I really want you to take an opportunity. Go to Spotify, go to your favorite streaming platform. Stream the entirety of the album. Listen to it from track 1 all the way through the end and just listen for those hidden gems of of singles that you may have heard, but go and find those hidden gems that are buried in some of these albums. Coming in at number 9, I have Chicago 8. Old Days was one of the biggest songs off of this. Thank you, Karen Pedler, for giving me this record. I fondly remember it as one of my very first part of my Chicago collection. It's that one, I believe it's with the chocolate cover. And it is a very, very good album. It's one of those start to finish you need to go and listen to. Old Days, I believe, is the big hit off of it. Coming in at number 8 is Chicago 10. Chicago 10 is about 75, 76, maybe 77. They had been around almost a decade at that point in time, and they hadn't quite gotten over that 25 or 64, Saturday in the Park. This is still, however, one of those great, great albums that has some incredible singles on it that I want you to go and discover. Chicago 10 coming in at number 8. At number 7 is Chicago 6. Okay, Chicago 6 is 3 albums before the greatest hits album Chicago 9, but it also has those singles, one or two. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I believe it's one or two radio friendly singles that you needed to go and listen to the album cut. Because like Chicago, like many other bands, Chicago had some additional things on their radio, their long play, their records that they didn't necessarily put into the edit on radio. So, as many artists do, the record is always better than the single, my opinion. Now, coming in at number 6 is Chicago 5. Are you feeling overwhelmed with some of these numbers already? Chicago 5 was the first single album that Chicago came out with that only had one piece of vinyl to it. CTA, Chicago 2, Chicago 3, Chicago 4 were all multiple album records, meaning multiple disc records. Unheard of for a band coming out of the 60s and 70s. Their first releases had so much music on them, and we continue to listen to a lot of that music from those early releases, that they had to have 2 discs to make sure they had all the tracks in that they wanted. No other band has ever done that. No other band. Chicago 5 represented the very first time that Chicago released a single disc record. It did very well for them. Again, go and find those singles that you know relatively well, but listen to that entire disc for the hidden jewels that are just all over it. Coming in at number 5, Chicago 7. The predecessor to Chicago 8, I mentioned Old Days a little while ago. Chicago 7, fantastic stuff. Spotify, your favorite streaming. Go and stream that entire album. I believe even YouTube Music has it as well. So now we turn the page with the top 5, or the bottom 5. Here we go into the top 5. Starting off with Chicago 17. This was probably their absolute best selling record. Chicago 16 came along. Everybody rediscovered Chicago. They had all of this great, great, great tour. But Chicago 17 actually sold better. That sold more records. It had 4, I want to say, top 20, maybe top 40 singles. And it just continued that steamroll of Chicago from Chicago 16 on. That's the reason it's at number 4, is because it continued a trend that was set before it by all of the other older records, but also the reinvention of Chicago that came about whenever David Foster came along to produce them. Now, let me step aside here for just a second. David Foster is not one of my favorite producers for Chicago. I think he commercialized them just a little bit too much. And now, was their success? Oh, absolutely incredible. Some of the biggest success Chicago ever saw was under the hand of David Foster. However, I think he had way, way, way too much control, and we lost the horns. in a lot of ways to synths and to a lot of the technology that was prevalent. But Chicago 17 continued that rally, if you will, of Chicago that really didn't die off until like 19 or 20. You really seen them start coming back down off that mountaintop that they had, and um, Cetera leaving, Jason Sheff, who was the lead singer for Chicago 17, phenomenal replacement for Cetera. Um, but it began a trend that you're just like, oh, okay. It's beginning to hit with Chicago like it has other bands now. So Chicago 17 is at number 4. For number 3, Chicago 19. It also continued that. Chicago 20 hits and you start seeing the Moses coming down the mountaintop kind of thing. Um, Chicago 19, however, really continued to hold firm. There was a little dip with 18 because you're just not 100% sure. And then 19 comes back. Go double check out those hit singles from 19. I think you'll remember a good many of them. Now, the final two. I want to take just a little bit more time with the final two. This was difficult for me. Number one, because I didn't discover the number two until much later in life. But once I did, I realized who Chicago truly was. I've mentioned Chicago 16 a couple of times, and it's a great record. It's a phenomenal record, but it's not my number two. Chicago Transit Authority, the original double vinyl, double disc, 2 disc set of their music. It features suites in music where you have different movements, which basically came out and became the different singles. Ballet for a Girl in Buchanan, I think, is one that Make Me Smile came from. Um, Several others like that. Terry Kath shows off and shows out on this record, the lead guitarist who was tragically killed later on in a gun accident and almost crippled the band at that time too. They didn't know whether they would go on. Alive Again was one of the tribute songs that came out of his death. But Chicago Transit Authority comes in at number 2 because it was the originator. It showed the world what you could do with a jazz fusion rock and roll band with horns. And it really highlighted the incredible talent that all of these guys, um, from Parazator on saxophone, Terry Kath on guitar, um, even Cetera on bass and his vocals, Robert Lamb on keyboard, James Pankow on trombone, um, Danny Seraphin on drums, and Lee Loughnane on trumpet. Those were the original guys, and they were legit, and they showed it on Chicago Transit Authority. Funny thing is, the actual Chicago Transit Authority threatened to sue them because of trademark infringement. Even back in '67, I think is when that record came out. They just didn't like the association of this band with their name. So, hence the shortened Chicago, as we all know and love. Now, coming in at number 1, I can't say enough about this record. It really, other than again, the aforementioned Saturday in the Park, 25 or 6 to 4, Old Days, Alive Again, some of these other classic things, it really for 80s kids, especially 82, 83, 84, I believe it came out in 82. Chicago 16 defined the 80s, early 80s especially. Um, those of us who were in college, it was formative time. They were just constantly on tour with this record. It is my number 1. Chicago 16 is my number 1 because it really takes a band formed in 1967 and catapults them to the top of the charts nearly 20 years later. That's unheard of as far as a band goes. The Stones have done it. They did that in the 80s as well, reinvented themselves a little bit. But Genesis, maybe there's an argument there that you could probably have, but there is only a handful of bands who've been around since the '60s with original cast members, the original band members, that you can say in the 80s they embraced the MTV generation and they embraced the things that were going on in the world and they put out incredible music. Chicago is one of those bands. Yes, it's a David Foster produced record, and yes, you can tell, but there's just so much good stuff there. There's just so many songs. Again, go and listen to the entirety of that record. Yes, you'll hear these radio friendly songs that were hit singles, but you'll also hear some of the other incredible songs written by the band members that stand pretty tall today. Chicago 16 tends to be maybe a little bit dated because of some of the synth and some of the production that Foster brought, but it stands alone as, in my opinion, the very, very best Chicago record ever. I apologize to you guys that may be purists. And again, Chicago Transit Authority is my number two. I struggled. I really, really personally wanted Chicago Transit Authority to be that number one, but unfortunately, there's not as many folks that listen to the entirety of that two disc set as they do Chicago 16. It's a good listen. Chicago Transit Authority is a wonderful listen, but you really that's more of their jazz flavor, not as much of their pop flavor. So if you're looking, it really depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for a rainy afternoon, just kind of laid back, some not laid back at all by any stretch. Freeform Guitar by Terry Kath is mind bending. Um, it's one of the most incredible guitar solos I've ever heard in my life. But you still have to kind of prepare yourself for listening to Chicago Transit Authority, getting your best jazz, fusion, you know, rock, heavy kind of feel going on. It's not really a record you can dance to, but it's a great, great record that if you're a fan of Chicago and you've never heard it, you need to go listen to CTA. Chicago 16, number one. And just again, for the hit singles that it has, for the propelling of Chicago back into the top 40 of radio, and for it being redefined for an entirely new generation of listeners who had known of them, like myself, but didn't really latch onto them until we heard uh, Hard to say I'm sorry and get away. I'll just have to say it. You had me at getaway. So there you have it, folks. There's my top 10 list of Chicago records. I wasn't very specific with singles, and I apologize for that. But I really, really, really want you to go and listen to these 10 records and see for yourself if Chicago is not the absolute best rock and roll band with horns ever imagined. Hey, Mr. Locknane, I salute you for continuing to tour um, and continuing to be the original band member for the band from Chicago. Thank you for the music. It's absolutely incredible. Even the newer releases are good, but it's still kind of a sad day when you've only got one original member left. Just ask some of the other bands that are out there. They'll tell you. Continue to tour. Continue to love their music. Let me know in the comments. Did I miss a record of theirs that maybe I should have included on my top 10? Kristen wanted me to do a top 40 of Chicago, and I'm like, that video takes way, way too long. Plus, it kind of gets convoluted, and I'm not sure they have 40 studio records because they have so many greatest hits packages. But someday just put Chicago into your YouTube search and then just press shuffle and see what happens. I think you too will find that there's an incredible range of music from this band. And they are continuing to tour with Lee Locknane and Company all over the country. So make sure if you get a chance, go and check them out. The new iteration is good. It's not Kath, Cetera, Lamb, Pankow, Parazator, Seraphim, Locknane. It's not those guys, but it's still Chicago. Thanks for watching today. Be watching for the next couple of weeks as we'll be back, and both of us will be here to hopefully entertain, but give you the opportunity to just enjoy the Crossing Kim family, which you are part of. Thanks for joining us. I'm Randy, and don't forget, we always end this way. Make sure that you like, subscribe, tell your friends, ring that notification bell so you know the next time that the doors of the Crossing King Garage are open to all of our family. We're glad you're here. Have a great afternoon. See ya.